He is worthy. Worthy is the Lamb. We've been talking about the Lamb breaking the seals on the scroll. There's been a lot of noise going on as these seals were broken. You know, one of the things that I really appreciate about living in the country is the quietness. The quiet that we get in the country. You know, whenever we go to a city, like Denver or Phoenix or really even Grand Junction anymore, I notice right away all the noise. And if we were staying overnight, all the city noise and traffic noise and stuff just makes it hard to sleep. It's just so noisy in the city. And then when we have guests that come to visit us out in the country, they always comment about how quiet it is here in the country. Well, we are in part 7 of our series, and you know, it's interesting how those words, peace and quiet, always kind of go together. There's something about quiet that gives us peace. Well, here in Revelation, we're going to be looking at chapter 8 today, and we're going to see that this chapter begins with silence. You know, if you've been with us here for the last few weeks, we've seen anything but silence, right? There's all sorts of things going on. With the breaking of the first 6 seals, there was all sorts of calamity happening on the earth and all this noise. And even last week when we talked about being in the eye of the hurricane, where it's usually kind of quiet, there was this celebration, this loud celebration going on in heaven. So here as we go into chapter 8, and the 7th seal is broken by the only one worthy to break that seal, we see that we're going to begin with quiet. So if you will turn to Revelation chapter 8, we're going to go through the whole chapter this morning. Revelation chapter 8, let's begin with verse 1. When the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now, this verse is unique in that it's the first reference to concrete time that John has given us. You know, we kind of have been talking about this in our weekly study about John doesn't really tell us what time frame is happening between each of the seals. Are these just happening one after another on the same day? You know, are there days or weeks or even years between each seal being broken? And you look at all of the damage that is being done to the earth, that would take some time. So there's got to be some kind of time frame between these seals, but John doesn't tell us what it is. But here, when the 7th seal is broken, John finally tells us there was silence for about a half hour. I don't think John looked at his smartwatch and timed how long things were quiet. So it's, however they gauged time back then, but he felt it was about a half hour of silence in heaven. And that is point number 1. If you're following along in your bulletin, on the back of your bulletin are sermon notes. Point number 1 that we get from this passage is, upon the opening of the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So that silence lasted for half an hour. You remember that after each of the first 6 of the 7 seals, there was a lot of bad things that happened on the earth. Heaven and earth was a noisy place. There were the noise of thunder, the roars of earthquake, the shouting of commands, the celebrations in heaven. There was a lot of noise going on in heaven and earth. But here, as the 7th seal is broken, everything is quiet. You know, last time I talked about the eye of the hurricane. Well, this can be like the end of that eye, the calm before the storm. Because after this quiet period, things are going to start happening again. But the 7th and final seal brings in a moment of silence. Why do we have moments of silence? Sometimes it's out of reverence. Perhaps it was silent in heaven because they were saddened by all that was happening on the earth. Sometimes we're silent out of fear. Sometimes silence is because of expectation. What's going to happen next? And in heaven, they are anticipating God is finally going to bring his wrath upon the earth and bring those martyrs. Finally, the judgment that the martyrs cried out for will be meted out. But for whatever reason, that silence was there. For about a half an hour, all of heaven was silent. Psalm 76 says that from the heavens you utter judgment. The earth feared and was still when God arose to establish judgment to save all the humble of the earth. Psalm 46 says, be still. This is God talking, right? Be still and know that I am God. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 7 says there is a time to be silent. When the seventh seal is open, there is a moment of silence. Next, John describes seeing 8 angels. 7 of them are given trumpets, and 1 of them is given a censer. The silence is about to be broken. Let's continue reading chapter 8, verses 2 through 5. Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer. And he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So the silence is definitely broken. Of the 8 angels that John sees, the 8th one is the first one to act. He is given a golden censer. In our Bible study, we kind of talked about what is a censer? What does that look like? I have a picture here. If you put up the picture, this is what a censer would look like, not necessarily back in John's time, but basically it's a metal implement that was used in the worship, and hot coals from the altar, the altar where sacrifices were made, hot coals from that altar would be placed inside the bowl, and then incense would be added to it. Sometimes there was a lid, sometimes there wasn't, and that smoke of the incense would be waved around, and that smoke would be an aromatic offering to God. Go ahead and clear that. The angel comes and stands at the altar, John tells us. Remember from chapter 6, what's beneath the altar? The souls of the saints of the martyrs, right? The souls of the martyrs, those who had given their life for the name of Jesus, beneath that same altar that the angel approaches. So he takes coals, he gets incense, and is mixed with the prayers of the martyrs, and those prayers are offered up to God. This shows us that God hears our prayers. God hears the prayers of the saints. It also, in this particular case, shows that they are finally about to be avenged. All right, the time has come for them to be avenged, their death to be avenged. So then after offering up the incense and the prayers of the saints, the angel fills the censer again with coals, and he hurls it down on the earth. And this results in peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. That silence that John spoke of is now broken. And God's judgment is being meted out again on the earth, right? The eye of the hurricane has passed. We're back in the midst of the hurricane. Now, as we go through this, remember, all of these, we're going to be talking about 7 trumpets. All of this is still part of the 7th seal. So it can get kind of confusing. We went through 7 seals, and now we're going to see 7 trumpets. But these 7 trumpets all fall under that 7th seal. John describes these 7 angels, and they're preparing to blow trumpets. In this chapter, John covers the first 4 trumpets, the first 4 angels and their trumpets. So that's what we're going to cover today, is the first 4. And then next week we'll get into the other trumpets. So let's look at Revelation chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. Revelation 8, chapter 6 and 7. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood. And these were thrown upon the earth. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Here we see hail and fire being rained down upon the earth. This isn't the first time that we've seen this. Right? If you remember in the Old Testament, a couple times God used hail and fire. In Genesis chapter 19, God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah with sulfur and fire raining down from heaven. In Exodus chapter 9, the 7th of the plagues that Moses brought upon, or God brought through Moses, upon the nation of Egypt to try to get Pharaoh to release the captives, the Israelites, the 7th plague was hail and fire coming from heaven, raining down upon the earth. So here in Revelation chapter 8, we see that God once again uses hail and fire from heaven. That leads us to point number 2 on our outline. Point number 2 in your outline is the first trumpet blast unleashes hail and fire mixed with blood. So hail and fire mixed with blood. That's a little different than we've seen in the past. This time there's blood mixed in with this hail and fire. And as a result, a third of the earth is burned up. A third of all the trees are burned up, and all of the green grass is burned up. Moving on to verses 8 and 9, Revelation chapter 8, verses 8 and 9. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. I remember when we began this study, I said that John uses a lot of figurative language, a lot of the use of like and as he tries to describe what he's seeing, these supernatural things that he's seeing. He has to try to put into language that we can kind of understand what he's talking about. So here he says something like a great mountain burning with fire comes falling down from the sky. I don't know about you, but that, to me, from our knowledge today, that kind of sounds like an asteroid, right? This big space rock coming down. When it comes through our atmosphere, it burns up. So that could be a way that he describes an asteroid or something like that. And you can imagine something that big falling upon the earth could cause a lot of problems. That leads us to point number 3 on your outline. Point number 3, the second trumpet blast results in a third of the sea becoming blood. A third of the sea creatures die, and a third of the ships in the sea are destroyed. All right, so the sea becomes blood, the sea creatures die, a third of them, and a third of the ships are destroyed. Well, all that happening, just prior to that, of course, hail and fire and mixed with blood, so there's already a lot of blood coming down. Then this giant thing falls in the earth, crushing a lot of the sea creatures, a third of the sea creatures dying, a third of the ships and the sailors on those ships. So there's a lot of blood in the sea. And just like God turned the river Nile to blood in Egypt, Right? Another supernatural thing has happened here. The sea is filled with blood. Moving on to verses 10 and 11. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it was made bitter. So here again, John is trying to describe what he's seeing in human terms, and again, things that he hasn't seen before. He describes a great star falling from the sky. Well, when I grew up, I don't know if you did the same thing. When you saw meteors, what did you usually call them? Shooting stars or falling stars, right? We know they're not really stars falling, but it's a heavenly body, something coming down from the sky. We kind of equate it to stars. So there's this thing coming from the sky. And, it could be like a shooting star. But he says it's something like, okay, there's that like again, something like a star falling out of heaven, blazing like a torch. Right? And their torches were, flames. It's flames on a stick, basically, was a torch. So he's picturing something coming from the sky with this big flame coming out the back of it. And there's many things that could be. It could be like a meteor or a comet. Some people have said, maybe it's a missile, like an ICBM. How would John, 2,000 years ago, try to explain to somebody if he sees this missile coming across the sky with this flame shooting out the back? We don't know for sure what it might be. If it was a missile, and maybe John is describing a nuclear war going on here. But he does say that whatever it is, it caused problems with the water. A third of the water supply is destroyed, and it becomes wormwood. The star, he says, is named Wormwood. Wormwood was a type of extremely bitter plant that grows in Palestine. And so he's saying that the water was bitter. It tasted like wormwood. So John could be describing some natural disaster of meteors falling down. He could be describing some man-made disaster like a war or a nuclear war. But you know what? He could also be describing just something supernatural. Something supernatural that God does. I mean, he created everything. He is God. He can do whatever he wants. And another thing is that, in the past, God has used armies to mete out his justice on the nation of Israel. He had the Assyrian army, take them captive. He had the Babylonian army come in and punish the nation of Israel. So he could use war between countries, countries fighting each other to mete out some of this disaster that is going on in the world. There's not a lot of detail here. There's a lot of figurative language. And a lot of times we focus on the how. We think of, okay, well, he's seeing this. Is that a missile? Is that a meteor? How could the whole, third of the ocean turn to blood? And we want to try to figure it out as if we're trying to justify that, okay, I guess this really is real because I can figure out a way that this might actually happen. But there's a lot of figurative language in this book. And I don't think we should be focusing on the how as much as we focus on the what or the results. John is describing the results of what happens. A third of the earth is going to burn up. Earlier, we already saw a quarter of the population died. And he gave us a little bit more detail there with sickness and wars and things like that. But don't get too caught up in trying to justify what John is saying with the how. Focus more on the results that are going to come about through these tribulations. The earth is on its way out. We've peaked at the end of the book. We know there's a new heaven and new earth around the corner. So this current earth is going to be destroyed. And I've always said, there's no way man is going to destroy this earth. Let's try as we might, we are not going to destroy the earth. God has reserved that privilege for himself. He created it, and he is going to destroy it. We can do a lot of damage, but God created this system in which it heals itself and whatnot. He is going to be the one that destroys this earth. So what we're seeing here are the results of man straying from God, man ignoring God, and God trying to reconcile us back, trying to get us back to him. And these are all the things that are going to happen to the earth. Now, these fantastic things as John's describing in his own language of the day, again, that may just all be figurative, but the results are real. So point number 4 on your outline there is a third trumpet blast. A third trumpet blast results in the contamination of a third of the waters, and many people die from the water. So point number 4, a third trumpet blast results in the contamination of a third of the waters, and many people die from the waters. Moving on to verse 12. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of the light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. So this third trumpet blast, the first 3 trumpet blasts announced some bad things happening on the earth. This fourth trumpet blast describes some things happening in the heavens. The sun, the moon, and the stars are all dimmed by 1/3. Again, I don't want to focus so much on the how, but this one should be fairly easy for us to understand, because last summer we had the fires at the Black Canyon. And you remember how the smoke blocked the sun? And at night, it blocked the stars and the moon. I don't know if anybody took a measurement of how much of that light was blocked, but a third of the light of the sun is what's going to happen here. Well, we've already seen that a third of the earth is burning, so there's going to be a lot of smoke in the air. Even just a few years ago, there were fires in California, and remember, we had the smoke from those fires in California came all the way here. So it's kind of easy, I think, for us to get our minds around how a third of the sun's light and the moon's light and the starlight could be dimmed from these tribulations that are going on here. So I was going to mention something about nuclear winter, but I don't think that's what John's describing here. Some people do. But, if that were the case, after an atomic war, they call this nuclear winter and it changes the climate and all that kind of thing. But it's easy to see God is going to dim the lights, right? I think figuratively, it symbolizes the light of the world is being removed before he returns, right? The light is coming back with a new heaven and a new earth. But I just kind of see that as kind of symbolic of, all right, you've wanted to stay away from God, well, totally removing God from the earth. All right, point number 5 on your outline. The fourth trumpet blast results in the dimming of a third of the sun, moon, and stars. The fourth trumpet blast results in the dimming of a third of the sun, moon, and stars. So things are going to be pretty grim here on earth. It's going to be dark, it's going to be smoky, it's going to be scary. And this is just 4 of the 7 trumpets. There's still more to come. But there's a brief pause in verse 13 before we move in next week to the other 3 trumpet blasts. Verse 13, John writes, "And I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead. Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth as the blasts of the other trumpets that the 3 angels are about to blow." Woe to those who dwell on earth at the blasts of these other trumpets. So things are pretty bad right now, and they're going to go from very bad to much worse when the next 3 trumpets are blown. I know this, this is that section I said is not easy to go through. It's not something that we want to see happen to our earth, even though maybe we deserve it. And it's hard to get through. But remember, if we peek at the end, there is a happy ending to this story. And those of us who belong to Jesus are going to be part of that happy ending. And remember the purpose of all of this happening. Throughout mankind's history, God has had to use difficulty in our lives to get us back on track. Something about our human nature, when things are going well, we don't think too much about God. We don't stop and give him thanks. We don't acknowledge that things are going well because of him. But when things get difficult, it tends to turn us back to him. And this is God's kind of giving us, mankind, a last chance to turn from their evil ways, to turn back to him, to ask for forgiveness. That's why all this is happening. It's mankind's last chance to receive salvation through Jesus Christ. And remember, as hard as it is to read about and hear about, for those of us who are secure in our faith in Jesus Christ, not because of anything we've done, but because of his sacrifice on the cross for us, we will be part of that happy ending. The new heaven and new earth, and all of eternity before the worthy Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So stick with me. There's still some hard chapters coming up, but eventually it does get a little sweeter. So hang in there.